There is a load sitting on the board right now that nobody will take. Romaine lettuce, Yuma to Chicago, 1,800 miles, and it has been sitting there since yesterday afternoon. In a normal year, it's gone in 9 minutes. That's the California produce run, the most famous freight lane this country ever built. And in 2026, drivers are walking past it. At 4 in the morning outside Yuma, Arizona, a man in his 50s stands at the fuel desk with a cup of coffee and his phone in his hand, looking at that exact load. He turns a fuel receipt over and writes 3 numbers on the back of it. What the fuel costs inside that state, what it costs him to come back empty, and what he can do with the same week if he skips it. Then he pockets the phone, walks out past 40 idling reefer trailers, and drives east with an empty box. Maybe that man is not alone. The headline you clicked on says, "Millions of truckers are refusing to drive this route in 2026, and I'll be straight with you because that's the deal on this channel. Nobody is blockading Interstate 5. There's no convoy circling Sacramento, no petition, no drivers chaining the gates at the port of Long Beach. What's happening is quieter. It's a route strike, carried out one declined load at a time in truck stop parking lots from Yuma to Bakersfield, by men who priced that run in both directions and said the 2 shortest words in any market. Not me. And I want to be precise about who I mean, because this crowd will hold me to it. There are roughly 3.5 million truck drivers in this country, and more than 900,000 of them are independent owner-operators. A company driver doesn't get to decline a lane. His dispatcher assigns it, and he runs it. So the refusal you're about to see lives almost entirely with the 900,000 men whose own name is on the loan, and it's their disappearance from the produce sheds that everybody else is now feeling. By the time we're done, you'll know the fuel gap that eats a load before the trailer is even loaded, the empty return that turns the best-paying freight in America into a break-even week. The reason a loaded reefer sitting overnight in the Central Valley is now the most dangerous thing a small carrier owns. And the compliance file that follows an out-of-state truck across the state line, whether the driver knows it or not. Then I'll show you what the federal government's own truck report accidentally admitted in January. And stay for the twist, because the punchline is that the refusal is working, and there's one number that proves it better than any rate chart. Before any of it means anything, understand what this route used to be, because for 50 years it was the crown jewel of American trucking. Roughly 40% of everything that arrives in this country by container comes through California ports. The Long Beach and Los Angeles terminals, the Oakland cranes, the warehouse country of the Inland Empire stretching east towards San Bernardino. And 4 hours southeast of all that, out in the desert on the Arizona line, sits the Imperial Valley. Drivers call it the Winter Salad Bowl, and that name is not marketing. Roughly 90% of the leafy greens Americans eat between November and March come out of that valley and the fields around Yuma. So every winter for decades, reefer trucks migrated west the way birds do. Sit in a shed lot in Holtville or Brawley, load cold produce at midnight, run it 2,000 miles to a dock in Chicago or Atlanta or Hunts Point. That was the run. Your grandfather ran it. Half the trucking stories ever told in this country happened between the Imperial Valley and the Rockies. That lane isn't thinning out because people stopped eating salad. It's thinning out because the machine that hauls the salad stopped clearing money on the round trip. And that phrase, round trip, is the whole video. It's the difference between how a driver reads a load and how everybody else does. A semi-truck is a machine for turning miles into money, and every owner-operator lives and dies on cost per mile. Fuel, tires, insurance, the payment, and the driver's own pay, all of it divided across the miles the truck actually rolls, which includes the miles you run empty to reach the load and the miles you run empty after you drop it. So a driver never prices a load. He prices a circle. And in 2026, the California Circle broke in 4 separate places. The first break you can read off a sign at every truck stop from Blythe to Barstow. In early August of 2026, the national average on-highway diesel price sat right around $5.35 a gallon. California, in the same window, was running north of $6.40. That's more than $1 a gallon of daylight between one state and the other, 49, and back in March it was worse. California diesel blew past $7 and jumped 35 cents in a single week, the biggest move in the country. Now do what a driver does and turn that into money. A Class 8 tractor with saddle tanks holds around 250 gallons at $1.05 a gallon of premium. Filling once inside that state costs about $260 more than filling in Arizona. Burn 300 gallons inside the state line in a week and you've handed over about $315 that a driver in Texas gets to keep. On a lot of freight, that is the entire margin. And this gap isn't weather, it's structural. California runs its own clean-burning fuel blend, and by law, that blend can't simply be trucked in from Nevada or Arizona, which makes the state close to an island market. Add the highest fuel excise tax in the country and carbon program costs baked in at the refinery. Then add the part that made 2026 different. The Phillips 66 shutdown in 2025 and the Valero shutdown in April of 2026 pulled roughly a fifth of the state's refining capacity offline. Fewer refineries, same island, no imports. Prices went where prices go. Drivers adapted the way drivers always do. Fill in Kingman, fill in Las Vegas, roll in on 3/4 of a tank, deliver, and get back across the line before buying another gallon, which works beautifully. Right up until the load you need to get back out with doesn't exist. That's the second break, and it quietly ends more small carriers than fuel ever will. Rates out of that state look terrific on a screen. During produce season, spot rates on premium reefer lanes out of California have run above $3.50 a mile in 2026. That's real money, and I won't pretend otherwise. The problem is the back half of the circle. Those outbound lanes end in places that have nothing waiting for you. Run a beautiful load from the Imperial Valley to a produce terminal in the Northeast, and now you're standing in a cold yard in New Jersey with an empty reefer and 1,100 miles between you and anything that pays like that again. Watch the arithmetic. 2,800 loaded miles at $4.50 is $12,600, and that check looks like the best week of your year. Then add the 1,100 empty miles home. 3,900 miles turned, same $12,600. Your $450 is actually $3.23. Now put California fuel underneath it, and a reefer unit burning fuel around the clock on top of it, and a week of your life inside it. The load that looked like a career best on the board turns into ordinary money for extraordinary miles. And every man reading that board has done this same math at a fuel desk at 4 in the morning, which is why a whole generation of experienced operators develop the same reflex about that state. And once enough of them develop it at the same time, the sheds in Holtville start looking a lot emptier at loading time. But the fuel and the empty miles only explain why a driver hesitates. They don't explain why he refuses. For that, you have to talk about what's happening in the parking lots. Cargo theft in North America is having the worst run in modern record. According to the annual analysis from Veris CargoNet, estimated losses reached nearly $725 million in 2025, up about 60% in a single year. And here's the shape of it that tells you everything. The number of hits barely moved. The money did. Which means the people doing this stopped grabbing whatever happened to be parked and started picking targets. The average theft is now worth more than $250,000. California is the epicenter. By one risk industry analysis, the state accounted for 38% of all recorded cargo theft incidents in the country, up from 32% the year before. And it's moving inland, straight into the produce country we've been talking about. Los Angeles County theft actually went down. Kern County jumped 82%. Bakersfield and Stockton are not port towns. Those are the truck stops and the staging yards along the spine of the Central Valley where a loaded reefer sits overnight waiting on a morning appointment, which is exactly what a produce load does. An insurance man will tell you the freight is covered. Ask a small carrier what actually happens. The deductible, the claim, the renewal premium that arrives 60 days later, the shipper who never books you again, and the 2 weeks of income that didn't happen while it all got sorted out. A 5,000 truck fleet absorbs one of those and never notices. A man with one truck and a family absorbs one of those and he's done. Everybody hauling that route knows it. and it changes where they're willing to shut down for the night. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover the working side of this industry every week, the part that shows up on the fuel receipt instead of the press release. Now, the fourth break, and this is the one nobody outside trucking ever hears about, because an out-of-state truck does not leave its paperwork at the state line. It brings the paperwork with it. Picture a man in Missouri with one Peterbilt, no compliance department, and no idea any of this exists. He takes one load into Fresno. The moment he crosses that line, his truck is a subject vehicle under California's Clean Truck Check program, the state's inspection and maintenance rule for heavy diesel. Not California-plated trucks. Any truck over 14,000 pounds operating on California public roads. That means reporting into a state database, paying an annual fee, and passing emissions testing. Most trucks test twice a year now, and starting in late 2027, many move to 4 times a year. The fee is about $32. The fee was never the problem. The problem is what happens when he falls out of compliance without knowing he was ever in it. A missed deadline can trigger a registration hold. A non-compliant truck can be turned away at a port or a rail yard, which for a drayage driver is the same as being unemployed. And under state health and safety code, penalties can run from $1,000 to $10,000 per vehicle per day. Enforcement comes through roadside checks, highway patrol inspections, remote emissions monitoring, and automated plate readers scattered around the state. Our man in Missouri never sees any of it coming. Then add uncertainty, which is its own poison. In January of 2026, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency issued a partial disapproval of how California applies that program to out-of-state trucks. The state's Air Board answered that the disapproval affects emissions accounting, not enforcement, and restated in March that trucks registered elsewhere still have to report, pay, and test. So one man with one truck is reading 2 government agencies saying 2 different sounding things about whether his rig is legal 1,200 miles from his house, where a wrong answer costs $1,000 a day. Let me be fair here, because this crowd can tell when a channel is selling a grudge. The air quality goals behind these rules are not a conspiracy. Exhaust coming out of a modern stack is dramatically cleaner than what came out of a truck in 1999, and the people living downwind of the Inland Empire warehouse corridor are breathing the results. That's real and it matters, but regulations aim at the smokestack and the buckshot lands on the little guy. A 5,000 truck fleet hires 2 people to handle clean truck check and spreads them across 5,000 trucks. A 1-truck operation handles it at 11 at night in a sleeper berth with 2 bars of signal. Same rule. Completely different weight. So that's the strike. Fuel you can't escape. A return trip that doesn't pay. The highest theft concentration in North America sitting on top of your load overnight. And a compliance file that follows you home. But all of that is still just drivers talking. In January, it stopped being a hunch and showed up in federal data. Every week, the Department of Agriculture publishes a fruit and vegetable truck rate report. Dry reading. It tells you, region by region, whether there are enough trucks to move the crop. In a normal January, it shows adequate supply across most of California, with the Imperial Valley tight because everybody's chasing winter greens. The report for mid-January of 2026 showed all 5 of California's produce regions reporting a shortage of trucks at the same time. Dean Croak, principal analyst at the load board company DAT, flagged it publicly and said plainly that carriers were avoiding the California winter vegetable market and that what was different this year was federal enforcement. Because the other thing that happened over that winter was a federal push on commercial licenses and immigration enforcement inside the trucking workforce. Border Patrol's Operation Highway Sentinel arrested 87 license holders in California operations in November and December of 2025. The Department of Transportation moved to restrict commercial license eligibility for non-citizens. California fought the federal government over roughly 20,000 non-domiciled commercial licenses and lost $160 million in federal transportation funding over its refusal to revoke them. Separately, More than 10,000 drivers nationally have been placed out of service for English language proficiency violations since June of 2025. You'll find people who argue passionately that this was overdue safety enforcement and people who argue just as passionately that it pulled working capacity out in the middle of harvest. That argument belongs in your comments, not in my narration. What isn't arguable is what happened in the sheds. Trucks that used to show up in the Imperial Valley in January stopped showing up in January. Stack that on the fuel gap, the empty return, the theft map, and the compliance file, and you don't need a union hall to organize a strike. You just need a load board and a calculator. Now here's the twist, and it's my favorite number in this whole story. It isn't the rate, it's the rejections. Tender rejection rates measure how often a carrier says no to freight it already agreed under contract to haul. That number has been running at multi-year highs. Sit with what that actually is. A tender rejection is a driver's refusal, recorded in somebody else's spreadsheet and counted by the industry that's trying to move the freight. And underneath it, the price is moved exactly the way you'd expect. Produced season spot rates on premium reefer lanes out of California have been running above $3.50 a mile. California outbound gets written up in market reports as one of the most expensive markets in the country. In June of 2026, the national dry van spot rate climbed above the contract rate for the first time since February of 2022, which answers the obvious question. If it pays $3.50, why is anybody still refusing? Because $3.50 is what it costs to get a truck now, and after the fuel gap and the empty return, $3.50 is roughly what the run used to pay before any of this started. The premium isn't profit. It's a repair on a broken circle, and it isn't finished yet. That's why the freight has to bid for a truck instead of the other way around. When a lane has to pay extra just to find somebody willing to run it, that's not a hot market. That's a verdict. Withhold the labor, and the price of the labor goes up. Trucking just proved it, without a single meeting. So who wins here? The big carriers do. A fleet with 5,000 trucks has a compliance department, late model equipment that clears every California rule, fuel bought on a national contract, a security team, and enough freight density that it never deadheads 1,100 miles. Every rule that adds fixed overhead makes a big fleet stronger against a small one, because overhead divided by 5,000 trucks is nothing, and divided by one truck is everything. The brokers do fine too, because a jumpy spot market is a wide spread, and a wide spread is where the middle gets paid. The one who doesn't win is the man in the Yuma parking lot at 4 in the morning doing arithmetic on the back of a fuel receipt. So if you're still in this game, here's what the numbers say to do. First, price the circle, never the load. Before you accept anything into that state, know what you're getting out with and what it pays. Without the back half of the trip, you're not booking freight. You're booking a bet. Second, buy your fuel where it's cheap and cross the line as full as the law allows. $1 a gallon is the easiest money on this route, and it's the one line item nobody can regulate away from you. Third, be compliant on purpose or stay out on purpose. Get your truck into the state system and keep your testing current, or write California off the list entirely and build around lanes where the overhead doesn't follow you home. What kills small carriers is the middle position, running that state casually and hoping nobody looks. And fourth, treat where you park like part of the load. Never sit loaded overnight in a yard you don't know in the Central Valley or the Inland Empire. High-value freight parked in the wrong place is the one decision on this list that can end a business in a single night. So tell me in the comments and be straight with me, because this crowd knows this run better than any analyst I can quote. Have you pulled California produce, and would you take that load today? What's the worst empty return you ever ate coming out of that state? And if you've been through a clean truck check inspection or a scale house on Interstate 5 with an out-of-state plate, tell me what happened. Because those stories teach more than any regulation summary I can read. Next time we're opening up the one people keep asking me about, where the money actually goes between the shipper and the truck, what the broker takes, what the load really paid before it ever reached you, and why the man moving the freight ends up last in line for it. That driver outside Yuma is somewhere east of Albuquerque by now, pulling an empty box toward a load that pays on both ends. The Romaine is still in the shed, waiting on somebody who hasn't run the numbers yet.